I never believed in curses until I inherited my grandfather's sugar shack in Saint-Adrien-du-Lac. I'm a food historian by trade, spent the last decade documenting vanishing culinary traditions across Quebec. When the lawyer called about Grandpa Laurent's estate, I thought I'd finally have a chance to study authentic maple syrup production firsthand. Maybe write a book about it. The drive up into the Laurentians that March morning should have been beautiful. Fresh snow on the pines, that clean bite of Canadian spring in the air. But something felt off the moment I crossed into the village limits. The town sat too quiet under its blanket of white. No dogs barking. No kids playing. Just smoke rising straight up from chimneys in the still air, like the whole place was holding its breath. The locals watched my rental car pass with expressions I couldn't quite read. Not unfriendly, but intensely focused, like they were memorizing my face. I told myself it was typical small-town curiosity. Looking back, I realized they were sizing me up, calculating. The sugar shack stood a half-mile beyond the last house, surrounded by ancient maples that seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a cathedral ceiling overhead. Beautiful, sure. But there was something hungry about those trees. The first delegation arrived before I'd even unpacked. 5 villagers led by a woman named Marguerite who introduced herself as the keeper of traditions. They were all smiling, but their eyes stayed flat and watchful. "Your grandfather was a good man," Marguerite said in French, accepting the coffee I offered. "He understood the old ways. The first tap ritual, you know about this, yes?" I nodded politely, assuming she meant some quaint ceremony. She explained I needed to perform it before starting production. Pour a vial of my own blood into the roots of the mother tree, the massive maple that dominated the grove behind the shack. "Just a few drops," she assured me, "to honor the covenant." I laughed, couldn't help it. I'm a scholar, not a superstitious fool. I told them I appreciated the local color but wouldn't be participating in any blood rituals. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Marguerite's smile didn't waver, but something ancient and cold flickered behind her eyes. "Your grandfather never refused," she said quietly. "Think carefully, Elias." After they left, I found myself staring at the mother tree through the window. It had to be 300 years old, its trunk scarred and twisted. And I swear, though I know it was just the wind, I heard it whisper my name. I started tapping the trees the next morning out of pure spite. I'm not usually petty, but the presumption of these people demanding blood made me stubborn. The ritual tools were right where Grandpa had left them. Clean taps, collection buckets, everything organized with military precision. The work felt good, physical, real. But within hours, something went catastrophically wrong. The sap that should have run clear and sweet came out thick and dark, almost black, with an oily sheen that caught the light wrong. It didn't smell like maple, it smelled metallic, organic, like the inside of a body. I tested 3 different trees. Same result. By noon, every bucket in the grove contained that same viscous black liquid. And then the sound started. At first, I thought it was wind through the branches, that low moaning you sometimes hear in dense forest. But as I stood there, bucket in hand, the sound resolved into something that made my blood turn to ice water. It was my grandfather's voice, calling my name. Not from any particular direction, but from the trees themselves, vibrating through the wood. "Elias, pourquoi? Why did you refuse?" I dropped the bucket and ran back to the shack, my rational mind scrambling for explanations. Auditory hallucination. Stress. Grief playing tricks. But when I looked back, every single tree in the grove was weeping that black sap, and the sound of my grandfather's voice followed me inside, seeping through the walls. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. The shack creaked and groaned like a ship at sea, and underneath it all that whispered chorus of voices, not just my grandfather now, but dozens of them, speaking French, English, even languages I didn't recognize. At 3 a.m. I started searching. Grandpa had been meticulous about records, and I needed to understand what the hell I'd stumbled into. The cellar door was hidden behind a false wall panel in the storage room. Amateur work, really. I found it within 20 minutes. The stairs descended into darkness that my flashlight barely penetrated. The smell hit me first. Sweet rotten copper. The cellar was larger than the shack above it, carved directly into the rock of the mountainside. And the jars. Jesus Christ, the jars. Hundreds of them lined the walls on rough wooden shelves, each containing syrup that ranged from amber to that same oily black I'd seen today. But it was the labels that made my stomach drop. Names. Dates. Martin Dubois, 1974, Sarah Chen, 1989, Thomas Björk, 2003. I recognized some of them from my research. Hikers who'd vanished in the Laurentians over the decades. Cold cases that had never been solved. The most recent jar was labeled Laurent Beaumont, 2024. My grandfather. The syrup inside was still dark red, not yet fully transformed to black. I'm ashamed to admit I didn't run immediately. The historian in me needed to understand. I found Grandpa's journals in a wooden chest. Decades of meticulous records written in his careful hand. The truth was worse than any ghost story. The syrup wasn't just syrup. According to his notes, the mother tree was some kind of biological archive, preserving not just the physical essence of those who fed it, but their memories, their consciousness. The villagers had discovered this property centuries ago, back when the first settlers made their covenant with whatever dark presence inhabited these woods. They'd been using it ever since, not eating it, but rubbing it into their skin, absorbing the life force and memories of the missing to extend their own lives. Marguerite was 247 years old according to these records. The youngest villager was 83, and the system only worked if the mother tree was fed regularly. Fresh blood to thin the sap, fresh bodies when the blood wasn't enough. My grandfather had been the designated keeper, luring hikers, making them disappear, processing them. That's why he'd left everything to me. I was supposed to be his replacement. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd refused the first tap. I'd broken the covenant, and now the mother tree was angry. I grabbed the journals and ran for my car, but the forest had other plans. The roots had been growing all day while I was distracted, thick, pale tendrils that had broken through the shack's floorboards and punctured my tires. They were moving as I watched, questing through the air like blind snakes. I could hear the villagers approaching through the trees, their footsteps crunching in the snow, their voices raised in some kind of chant. I did the only thing I could think of. I went back down to the cellar and barricaded myself in. For 3 days I survived down there in the dark, listening to them dig. The roots came first, pushing through the rock, wrapping around the jars. Then the voices started again, but clearer now. The people in the jars were trying to warn me. Fragments of their final moments, their terror, their regret at leaving the trail, at trusting the friendly old man with the sugar shack. On the 4th day, I found a drainage tunnel that led to an old stream. I crawled through freezing water for what felt like hours, clutching Grandpa's journals to my chest. When I finally emerged 2 miles down the mountain, I could still hear the mother tree calling me, promising to preserve me forever, to make me part of something eternal. The RCMP took a statement. They even sent officers to St. Adrien du Lac. According to their report, they found an abandoned sugar shack. No cellar, no jars, and a very confused village wondering why some crazy tourist was making up stories about them. The officers suggested I'd had a mental health crisis triggered by grief. Maybe they were paid off. Maybe the villagers moved everything. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me awake, maybe the mother tree can rewrite reality itself for anyone who gets too close. I still have the journals, hidden somewhere the authorities will never find them. I've documented everything, uploaded copies to servers across the world, but I know it won't matter. Last week I found a small maple sapling growing outside my apartment window here in Montreal. I'm on the 7th floor. There's no soil, no planter, just roots that have somehow punched through concrete and steel to reach me. So listen carefully. If you're ever driving through the Laurentians and you see a sign for St. Adrien du Lac, keep going. Don't stop for directions. Don't accept invitations to tour sugar shacks. And if you smell maple syrup on the wind in a place where nothing should be growing, run. Because the mother tree is always hungry, and it never forgets a face. I know because I can feel it even now, sending roots through the foundation of this building, patient and inexorable, stitching me back into the covenant I never asked to join. I need to tell you something about shadows before this goes any further. You probably think yours follows you around because of light and physics, right? That's what I thought too, back when I was still Mark Holloway, paranormal debunker with 340,000 YouTube subscribers and an ego twice that size. I made my living exposing small-town legends, showing my audience how easily fear turns ordinary people into believers. Gray's Cove, Nova Scotia was supposed to be my November special. Just another fishing village clinging to some ridiculous maritime superstition about fog and bells and silence. I thought I'd roll in there with my cameras and rational explanations, get some great footage of terrified locals, maybe hit 500,000 subscribers by Christmas. The drive down the coast should have warned me. Highway 3 gets lonely once you pass Shelburne. But the last 20 miles to Gray's Cove felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The fog came in so thick my headlights just died in it, swallowed up like they'd never existed. I had to slow to 15 miles an hour, following the faint white line on the road's edge. And the silence. Even with my windows up, I could feel it pressing against the glass. Not just absence of sound, but something hungry and waiting. When I finally saw the village sign emerging from the white, I actually felt relieved. Stupid. That relief lasted exactly as long as it took me to notice that Gray's Cove had no sound at all. I arrived on October 31st, late evening, and found the village completely dark except for oil lamps in windows. No streetlights. No television glow. No engine sounds or music or voices. The bed and breakfast where I'd booked a room sat on the harbor's edge. A weathered Victorian house that looked like it was slowly sliding into the Atlantic. The owner, Mrs. Arsenault, opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been standing there waiting. She was maybe 70, with that weathered maritime face that's seen too many storms and eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. "You're the YouTube fellow," she said quietly. "Not a question. You'll want to set up your equipment tonight. Tomorrow we don't speak. We don't make noise. We listen." I gave her my usual charming skeptic routine, asking about the legend, the brass toll, the ritual. She just shook her head and handed me a key. "Your room faces the harbor. You'll see the bell rock from your window. Whatever you do tomorrow, Mr. Holloway, don't look at the water when the bell rings. And don't go outside." She walked away before I could ask more questions, her footsteps completely silent on the old wooden floors. That's when I realized she wasn't wearing shoes. None of them were. I'd passed 3 people on the street walking to the house, and not one of them had been wearing shoes despite the November cold. I spent that night setting up cameras at my window and researching. The legend of Gray's Cove was older than I'd expected, references going back to the 1700s, when the village was first settled. Every November 1st, a brass bell supposedly rings from Bell Rock, a jagged outcrop about 200 yards offshore. The bell itself is real. I could see it in my telephoto lens, an ancient piece of maritime brass bolted to the rock, green with verdigris. But there's no rope, no mechanism, nothing that could make it ring. According to local folklore, when the bell rings, something called a fog walker comes searching. The villagers have to stay silent and keep their eyes down, or it will find them. And if it finds you, you have to walk into the ocean to become the new bell ringer. Classic isolated community superstition, right? The kind of thing that develops when you spend centuries staring at fog and losing fishermen to storms. I plan to debunk the whole thing by showing my viewers that the bell was probably rung by wind patterns. Or maybe the locals themselves as part of an elaborate tradition to scare tourists. I set up 4 cameras, one facing the rock, one facing the street, one facing my room, and one for my narration. I was going to catch them in the act. At midnight, I looked out at the harbor one more time before sleeping. And I swear to God I saw something tall moving through the fog. Too tall, walking on the water. November 1st arrived wrapped in fog so dense it turned the world into a 3-foot bubble around my window. I couldn't see Bell Rock anymore, couldn't see the street, could barely see my own hand when I held it up. And the silence was absolute, not peaceful, oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I started filming at dawn. The villagers were already outside, maybe 40 or 50 people ranging from children to elderly, all of them kneeling in the street facing the harbor. No one spoke. No one moved. They just waited, eyes fixed on the ground, barefoot on the cold cobblestones. The wrongness of it crawled under my skin. This wasn't performance. This was genuine terror. At exactly 7:14 a.m., I know because I checked the timestamp later, the bell rang. One single deep toll that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. It resonated through the fog, through the buildings, through my bones. It sounded like brass, yes, but also like something organic, something that had once been alive. Every villager immediately covered their eyes with their hands. Mrs. Arsenal was directly below my window, and I could see she was crying, tears running down her weathered cheeks as she pressed her palms against her face. My rational mind was already working, forming explanations about acoustic tricks and mass hysteria. But my body knew better. My body wanted me to stop looking at the harbor, to close my eyes, to hide. Instead, I grabbed my best camera and pointed it at the water. The fog walker came through the white like a nightmare stepping into reality. I saw it through my viewfinder first, a dark shape maybe 15 feet tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at too many joints. It was walking across the surface of the harbor, each step rippling the water but not breaking through, and as it moved, the fog moved with it, swirling around it like the thing was generating it from its own body. I should have stopped looking. Every instinct I had screamed at me to close my eyes, to get away from the window. But I'm a debunker, right? This is what I do. I kept filming, zooming in, trying to capture details that would prove it was a person on stilts or a projected image or anything that made sense. That's when I noticed something that made my hands start shaking. The figure had no face, no features at all. Just a dark, smooth surface where a head should be. And it was moving methodically through the fog, its head tilting back and forth like it was searching. Hunting. The bell rang again. Twice. 2 deep tolls that made my teeth ache. Down in the street, someone screamed, a young man, maybe 25, who jumped to his feet and started running inland, away from the harbor. The fog walker's head snapped toward the sound with predatory speed, and then I realized what I was seeing. The thing's movements matched the young man's exactly. A split second delayed. When he zagged left, it zagged left. When he stumbled, it stumbled. It wasn't chasing him, it was mirroring him. The man ran maybe 50 yards before he stopped, his whole body going rigid. Then he turned around and started walking toward the water, his movements jerky and wrong, like something else was operating his limbs. The villagers didn't move, didn't try to stop him, just kept their eyes covered as he walked past them, down to the rocky beach, into the surf. He walked until the water closed over his head. The fog walker stepped into the same spot on the surface above him and sank down until it disappeared. When the fog cleared enough to see Bell Rock again, there was a new figure standing on it, human-sized, ringing the bell with hands that moved like they were still learning how fingers worked. That's when I felt it. A vibration in my chest. Not my heart. Deeper. More metallic. The bell was ringing inside me. I dropped my camera and pressed both hands against my sternum, feeling the vibration growing stronger, resonating through my ribs like my chest cavity had become a brass chamber. In the viewfinder of my fallen camera, I could see my shadow on the wall behind me. Except it wasn't doing what I was doing. I was bent over, hands on my chest. Panicking. My shadow was standing upright, perfectly still, its head tilted at that same searching angle I'd seen on the fog walker. Then it moved. My shadow peeled itself off the wall and stepped onto the floor, 3-dimensional and solid in a way shadows should never be. It started walking toward the window, toward the harbor, and I felt my body lurch forward, following it. I tried to fight it, grabbing onto the bedpost, the dresser, anything to anchor myself. But the pull was inexorable. My shadow wanted to go home, back to the water, and it was dragging me with it. I could hear the bell, my bell, tolling in my chest with each step. I made it to the street before Mrs. Arsenault tackled me. She was stronger than she looked. And she wasn't alone. 3 other villagers held me down while she pressed both hands over my eyes. "Don't look at it," she hissed in my ear. "Don't look at your shadow. It can only take you if you see it." We stayed like that for hours, me shaking and crying while they held me in the street. The bell in my chest ringing and ringing until I thought I'd go insane from the sound only I could hear. The RCMP found me the next morning standing on Bell Rock. I don't remember walking into the harbor or climbing onto the rock. I don't remember the water or the swim or anything after Mrs. Arsenault let go of my eyes. According to their report, I was suffering from hypothermia and shock, but otherwise unharmed. They took me to a hospital in Halifax, ran tests, found nothing physically wrong. The doctors suggested a psychotic break triggered by isolation and suggestion. My footage told a different story, but I never posted it. I tried once, but my hands wouldn't work right on the keyboard. They'd just tap in rhythm, like I was trying to ring a bell instead of type. You want to know the truth about Gray's Cove? It's still there, and they're still doing the ritual every November 1st. A new person walks into the water most years, sometimes locals, sometimes tourists who didn't listen to the warnings. The village protects itself by letting the fog walker take what it needs. And me? I'm typing this in a psychiatric facility in Ontario, as far from the ocean as I could get. I'm healthy, the doctors say. Functional. The only unusual thing is that I cast no shadow anymore. no matter how bright the light. And I can't speak. My vocal cords work fine according to the tests. But the only sound I can make is a ringing tone, clear and brass bright. Especially when fog rolls in. So here's my warning, and I'm begging you to take it seriously. If you're ever on the Nova Scotia coast and you see a village wrapped in fog, a place so quiet it hurts your ears, don't stop. Don't investigate. Don't film, and for God's sake, don't look at your shadow. Because some things in this world hunt by reflection, and once they separate you from your darkness, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to wring your way back to them. There are parts of me rusting right now as I tell you this. I can feel them, my left shoulder blade, 3 ribs on my right side, something deep in my jaw that grinds when I talk. The doctors can't explain it. X-rays show metal where bone should be, oxidizing iron where marrow used to flow. They think it's some kind of rare mineral deposit disorder. They're wrong. I'm a civil engineer, or I was before this happened. I spent 5 years surveying bridge infrastructure across British Columbia, which is how I ended up in Ravens Peak that February. The town sits in a valley so remote that the only access is a single-lane suspension bridge built in 1952, swaying 200 feet above the Cascade River. I was there to assess whether the bridge needed replacement or if we could squeeze another decade out of it. Professional work. Rational. Safe. My brother Danny came with me because he just lost his job in Vancouver and needed to clear his head. He was always the impulsive one. I was the planner. The careful sister who read instruction manuals and followed rules. That difference is why I'm here telling you this story and Danny isn't anywhere at all anymore. The flyer appeared on our cabin door on February 28, 2024. Leap year. Neither of us had heard anyone approach, but there it was, thick carnival paper. The kind that feels expensive and old, decorated with Art Deco designs that belong to the 1920s. The Midnight Fair. It announced in gold lettering. Open this night only. Follow the 10 rules. The rules were printed on the back in small, precise script. I remember reading them out loud to Danny while he made coffee, both of us laughing at how weird small towns could be. Rule 1. Enter only after midnight. Rule 2. Take nothing that isn't won. Rule 3. Never consume blue-colored concessions. Rule 4. If a ride stops mid-cycle, remain seated until dawn. Rule 5. Do not make promises to the machines. Rule 6. Speak only in questions after 2 am. Rule 7. Win no more than 3 prizes. Rule 8. Exit before the rooster crows. Rule 9. Do not look at your reflection in the mirror tent. Rule 10. The grand prize may only be claimed once per bloodline. They're really leaning into the creepy carnival aesthetic, Danny said, grinning. He wanted to go. Of course he did. I should have said no. Should have reminded him we had work in the morning, that we were professionals with responsibilities. But I saw the excitement in his eyes, the first real spark I'd seen since his layoff, and I couldn't bring myself to extinguish it. We walked down to the valley just before midnight, following the sound of calliope music that shouldn't have been audible from 2 miles away. The suspension bridge swayed under our feet, its cables humming in the wind. When I looked back at Ravens Peak, every light in town was off. Every single one. Like the whole place was holding its breath. The carnival sat in the valley like a jewel box, all lights and music and movement. But as we got closer, I realized what was wrong. There were no people. The rides were running. A Ferris wheel, a carousel, a scrambler. All moving in perfect rhythm. But there were no operators, no ticket takers, No crowds. The games were running themselves too. I watched a ring toss where rings floated through the air and landed on bottles without any human intervention. Bells dinging automatically when they scored. The test your strength high striker had its hammer rising and falling on its own, hitting the pad with metronomic precision. Even the prize booths were automated. Stuffed animals and mirrors and bottles of colored glass arranged on shelves that rotated slowly, displaying themselves. "This is insane," I whispered, my engineer's brain trying to calculate the mechanisms involved. "This is the coolest thing I've ever seen," Danny said, and walked straight to a cotton candy machine that was spinning sugar into clouds of pink, white, and blue. I grabbed his arm. "Rule 3. No blue food," he laughed. "Sarah, they're just trying to make it spooky. It's probably just blue raspberry or something." He pulled off a tuft of the blue candy and put it in his mouth before I could stop him. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Danny's hand started to fade, not disappear. Fade, like someone was turning down his opacity. I could see through his fingers to the carnival lights beyond. He looked down at himself, watching in horror as the translucence spread up his arm, across his chest. "Sarah," he said, and his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. "Sarah, what's happening to me?" I grabbed the flyer from my pocket with shaking hands, searching for anything that might help. That's when I noticed the fine print at the bottom. Text so small I'd missed it before. "Rule violations may be corrected through gameplay. Consult the nearest attraction for terms." The high striker was closest. As we approached, me dragging Danny, who was now about 60% transparent, words appeared on its base, glowing like they were written in phosphorescence. "Return solidity through demonstration of strength. Strike true 3 times before the 3rd bell. Failure forfeits the contestant permanently." The hammer sat waiting on the ground, 7 feet of wood and iron that had to weigh 40 pounds. I'm 5'6" and I've never been athletic. There was no way I could ring the bell once, let alone 3 times. "You have to try," Danny said. I could barely see him now, just an outline, like he was becoming the idea of a person rather than an actual one. "I can't feel my legs anymore, Sarah. Please." I picked up the hammer. It was heavier than I expected, the handle worn smooth by what must have been thousands of hands over the years. Or maybe just dozens of hands, used thousands of times. How many people had stood here trying to win back something they'd lost? The first swing was pathetic. I got the hammer maybe 2 feet off the ground before it fell back, the puck barely moving up the tower. Danny's left leg disappeared completely. I tried again, putting my whole body into it, screaming with effort. The puck rose higher, maybe a quarter of the way up, but nowhere near the bell. Danny's torso was gone now. Just his head and one arm remained, floating in the air like a ghost. "Third strike," a voice said, though I couldn't identify where it came from. Maybe the machine itself. Final chance. I looked at my brother's fading face, at the terror in his eyes, and something inside me changed. Not strength exactly. More like I stopped caring about the rules I'd always followed, about doing things the right way, about being careful. I swung the hammer like I wanted to break the machine itself, to shatter this whole impossible carnival. The puck shot up the tower and struck the bell so hard it cracked. Danny solidified instantly, stumbling backward and gasping like he'd been held underwater. We held each other for a long moment, both shaking, while around us the carnival continued its automated celebration. That's when I started to understand. This place wasn't entertainment. It was a mechanism, a process. I'm an engineer. I recognize systems when I see them. And this whole carnival was designed to extract something and replace it with something else. We should have left then. Should have run back across that bridge and never looked back. But I needed to understand. I've always needed to understand how things work. And this place was like nothing I'd ever seen. We explored, carefully now, following the rules exactly. At 2 a.m. we started speaking only in questions, our conversations becoming strange and stilted. Do you see the tent ahead? Should we investigate it? The tent in question was striped red and white, with a hand-painted sign, the Hall of Discarded Virtues. Inside, we found what looked like a museum of human personality traits made manifest. Glass cases held swirling clouds labeled with plaques. Thomas Chen's Patience, discarded 1987. Margaret Holloway's Compassion, removed 2003. David Park's Honesty, extracted 2019. Each cloud moved with its own rhythm, pressing against the glass like it wanted out. In the center of the tent sat a Carnival Barker's podium with a ledger open to the current year. February 29, 2024 had 17 names listed. Next to each name was a trait they'd chosen to discard: guilt, fear, empathy, shame. The people of Raven's Peak were using the carnival to remove parts of themselves they didn't want, surgically excising their negative emotions and leaving them here, in this impossible machine, where they became the prizes and the fuel that kept everything running. We found the grand prize booth at the carnival's heart, marked by lights brighter than all the others. A simple sign hung above it: exit ticket, 1 per bloodline, win and leave forever. The game was basic: knock down 3 stacked bottles with a baseball. Except the bottles were made of something that looked like solidified darkness, and they whispered as we approached, speaking in voices I recognized. My voice, Danny's voice, our parents' voices, saying all the cruel, selfish, angry things we'd ever thought but never spoken out loud. What happens if we win? Danny asked, still following the question rule. Do we just leave and never come back? An old woman emerged from behind the booth, the first person we'd seen all night. She was ancient, her skin like paper, but her eyes were young and bright. The grand prize is a mirror, she said. You hold it up, and it shows you which half of yourself is pure. That half may cross the bridge. The other half stays here, powers the machines, keeps the carnival running. Most people find that acceptable. They get to leave their darkness behind and walk away clean. I understood then. This was Raven's Peak's real secret. Every leap year, the carnival let people split themselves, keep their better halves and discard everything else. No wonder the town seemed so peaceful, so perfect. Everyone here was literally only their good side. I looked at Danny, and I could see him considering it. The temptation was written all over his face. Leave behind his failures, his depression, his anger at losing his job, walk away as just the good parts. Do we want that? I asked him. And after a long moment, he threw the baseball. All 3 bottles shattered on the first throw, and a mirror materialized in his hands, its surface swirling with possibility. Danny held up the mirror. In its reflection, I saw him split, one version turning golden and warm, the other shadow and rust. The golden version stepped forward, holding the mirror, starting to walk toward the bridge. The dark version stayed behind, already beginning to transform into carnival machinery, his fingers elongating into ticket dispensers. I grabbed both of them. No, I said, breaking the question rule, not caring anymore. We're leaving together or not at all. The mirror shattered. The carnival went dark, and then we were running. Danny solid and whole beside me, the machines behind us screaming in mechanical rage. We made it across the bridge just as the sun rose. But I looked back. I couldn't help it. even though I knew I shouldn't, and I saw my reflection in the bridge's support cable, polished steel that caught the dawn light. My reflection wasn't running, it was walking back to the carnival, smiling while I continued forward. And that's when I felt it. The first patch of rust forming on my shoulder blade. Because I'd won and refused the prize. Because I'd taken Danny's wholeness and my wholeness both across that bridge. And now the carnival was slowly reclaiming its payment, turning me into the metal and machinery I'd stolen from its purpose. The rust spreads a little more each day. Eventually I'll be more machine than human, and I think I'll have to go back. I'll have to return to that valley and take my place among the games and rides, another attraction in the midnight fair. So if you're ever in British Columbia and you see a town accessible only by a suspension bridge, and you find a flyer promising something too good to be true, remember this: every system requires fuel, and every machine demands payment. Some places let you borrow your happiness, but they always collect the debt eventually, with interest measured in rust and regret. They're singing again. I can hear them through 6 inches of soundproofed walls, through the white noise machine I run constantly, through the medication that's supposed to stop the hallucinations the psychiatrists insist I'm having. A low, resonant hum that sounds like it's coming from inside the earth itself, or maybe from inside my own skull. The frequency makes my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. I know what they want. They want me to let them out. My name is Dr. Leo Chen, and I'm a climate researcher specializing in permafrost degradation. I've spent the last 8 years studying how climate change is transforming the Arctic, documenting what emerges when ground that's been frozen for millennia finally melts. I've found mammoth tusks, ancient tools, even bacteria that science thought were extinct. I thought I'd seen everything the ice could surrender. Then I went to Oatman's Drift in the Yukon Territory, and I learned that some things were frozen for a reason. The outpost isn't on most maps, just a cluster of weathered buildings around a played-out gold mine. Population 43. Accessible only by bush plane, or a brutal 2-day drive on roads that barely deserve the name. I arrived in September 2024, right as the brief Arctic summer was giving way to the long darkness. My grant was focused on studying accelerated permafrost melt in former mining regions, where disturbed ground was thawing faster than anywhere else in the north. The town elders met my plane personally, which should have been my first warning. In places like Oatman's Drift, people usually can't be bothered with outsiders. But these 4, 3 men and 1 woman, all indigenous, all somewhere between 60 and ancient, watched me unload my equipment with expressions of deep concern. "You're here about the thaw," the woman said. Not a question. Her name was Margaret, and she had the kind of eyes that had seen too much and remembered all of it. "We'll show you the site, but there are rules." I assured her I'd respect any cultural protocols, thinking she meant the usual restrictions about sacred sites or burial grounds. I was prepared to be sensitive, to collaborate. That's what good researchers do. Margaret shook her head slowly. "Not our rules. The rules that keep us alive." She took me to the site that same afternoon, a half-mile walk from the outpost into the taiga. The permafrost cliff was maybe 30 feet high, exposed where mining operations in the 1970s had carved into the hillside. And standing in the ice, perfectly preserved and perfectly vertical, were bodies. 7 of them that I could see, spaced evenly along the cliff face like they'd been planted there. They were dressed in clothing from the 1800s, fur parkas, leather boots, wool trousers. But what made my breath catch was their positions. They weren't lying down like typical burials. They were standing at attention, arms at their sides, faces tilted slightly upward. And their eyes were open, staring through the translucent ice with expressions of absolute terror. Gold Rush era, I said, my researcher's brain cataloging details. These could be incredibly valuable historical finds. We need to properly excavate, document, preserve. We need to keep them frozen, one of the elders interrupted. His name was Joseph, and his voice had the kind of authority that ended arguments. The refreezing happens every night at midnight. You can watch, but you can't interfere. That night I watched them perform the ritual. All 43 residents of Oatman's Drift gathered at the cliff, carrying buckets of steaming water. Working in silence, they poured the boiling water over the frozen bodies in a specific pattern, starting at the heads and working down. The water should have melted the ice. Instead, it seemed to seal it, adding another crystalline layer that made the bodies even harder to see. I spent 3 days documenting and taking samples, trying to understand the geological and historical significance of the site. The elders watched me constantly, making sure I stayed within the boundaries they'd established. Don't touch the bodies. Don't chip the ice. Don't work after dark. Every night, the whole town performed their refreezing ritual with grim efficiency. On the 4th night, I confronted Margaret about it. This is a desecration of an archaeological site, I told her, trying to keep my voice professional despite my frustration. Those bodies could tell us so much about Gold Rush history, about survival in extreme conditions. The way you're treating them, pouring boiling water every night, you're destroying contextual information, possibly damaging the remains. She looked at me with something like pity. You think we're protecting history? We're not. We're protecting you. From what? From what's inside them. I didn't believe her. Of course I didn't. I'm a scientist, trained to trust evidence over superstition. That night I made my decision. I'd extract one body, carefully, professionally, and transport it to my climate-controlled lab trailer for study. I'd document everything, prove that these were just incredibly well-preserved historical remains, and hopefully convince the elders to allow proper archaeological excavation. I waited until 3 a.m., when the whole outpost was asleep. The permafrost cliff was only half a mile away, and I had industrial tools designed for ice extraction. I chose the body on the far end, a man, maybe 30 years old when he died, with a thick beard and eyes that seemed to watch me even through the ice. It took 2 hours of careful work with heat lances and chemical melters to free him. The ice didn't want to release its grip. When I finally got him out, the body was perfectly intact, still rigid with cold. I loaded him onto a sled and hauled him back to my lab trailer, adrenaline and scientific excitement overriding my exhaustion. I set him on my examination table and turned up the heat, planning to let him thaw gradually while I documented every stage. My equipment was recording, thermal cameras, moisture sensors, everything I'd need for a complete scientific record. For the first few hours, nothing happened. Normal thermal dynamics of frozen organic tissue returning to ambient temperature. I took tissue samples, photographed every detail, measured the degradation of his clothing. The body was in impossibly good condition. No freezer burn, no cellular damage from ice crystal formation. It was like he'd been frozen instantly and kept in perfect stasis. Then, around 10 a.m., as his core temperature reached -5 Celsius, I heard it. A sound so low it was almost subsonic, vibrating through the table, through the floor, through my bones. The body was humming. I checked every piece of equipment thinking I'd left something running, that I was picking up interference from the generators. But no. The sound was coming from him. From inside him, as I watched, frozen in my own kind of paralysis, the man's eyes moved. Not much. Just enough to shift from staring at the ceiling to staring directly at me. His mouth didn't move. His chest didn't rise or fall. But those eyes tracked me with intelligence and intention as I stumbled backward, my rational mind fracturing against something it couldn't explain. The humming increased in frequency, and I realized with creeping horror that it wasn't random. It had pattern, structure. It was language. And then I heard footsteps running toward my trailer, the elders, Margaret in the lead, their faces masks of fear and fury. They burst through my door, took one look at the thawing body, and Margaret slapped me across the face hard enough to split my lip. "What have you done?" she screamed. "What have you done?" They worked with desperate speed, Margaret barking orders while the others hauled in equipment I hadn't known existed in the outpost: industrial freezers, chemical coolants, and buckets of something that steamed and stank of salt. Joseph grabbed me by my jacket and shoved me against the wall. "The permafrost isn't ice," he said, his face inches from mine. "It's a seal, a biological seal that something very old put in place before humans even came to this continent. Those bodies aren't preserved. They're inhabited. They're hosts for something that lived under the ground, something that can only move through liquid." I tried to process this, my scientist's brain rejecting it even as I heard the humming intensify behind me. "That's impossible. There's no organism that could." "You think permafrost is just frozen earth," Margaret interrupted, working frantically to pack the body in salt and ice. "It's not. It's a prison. Millions of years ago, something evolved down in the deep places of the earth. It had intelligence but no form of its own. It needed hosts, needed to inhabit other creatures. The ice trapped it, froze it solid in pockets throughout the Arctic. The people you see in that cliff found one of those pockets during the gold rush. It got into them, inhabited them, and the indigenous peoples who were here before the miners, they knew what to do. They froze the hosts upright as a warning. They taught us the refreezing ritual." The humming suddenly stopped. In the awful silence that followed, I heard liquid dripping onto my lab floor. The body's core temperature had reached 0 degrees. It was melting. And as it melted, something was moving inside it, no longer trapped by the solid state. I saw movement under the skin, something flowing, redistributing itself, learning the architecture of the body it inhabited. "The boiling water," I whispered, finally understanding. "You weren't trying to melt them. You were creating a salt barrier," Margaret finished, pouring another bucket of heavily salted boiling water over the body. "Salt water has a lower freezing point. It creates a layer that's liquid but too saline for the organism to move through. It keeps them in constant paralysis, conscious but unable to act. We've been torturing them for over a century to protect ourselves." The body's eyes moved again, and this time I saw something behind them. Not human intelligence, but something vast and alien and furiously aware. The organism inside understood what was happening, understood that it had almost been free. The humming started again, but now it was coming from outside. From the direction of the permafrost cliff, all 7 remaining bodies were resonating together, calling out to the one in my lab, or maybe calling out to others still buried deeper in the thawing ground. "How many are there?" I asked, my voice shaking. Margaret's face was grim. "We don't know. The mining operations exposed 7. But the permafrost in this region goes down 300 feet, and it's all melting. Climate change is breaking the seal, Dr. Chen. The ground that's been frozen since the Pleistocene is turning liquid, and everything that was trapped down there is waking up. We managed to refreeze the body, working through the day and into the night, layering it with salt and ice until it was sealed again. But the damage was done. I'd shown the organism what warmth felt like, shown it that the seal could be broken, and every night since, when the temperature drops and the ground freezes solid again, I can hear them humming, planning, waiting. I left Oatman's Drift 3 days later, and I haven't been back. The elders made me swear I'd never publish my findings, never reveal the location, never speak about what I'd found. I agreed. What else could I do? But here's what keeps me awake. What makes me monitor permafrost degradation reports obsessively from my office in Vancouver. The Arctic is melting faster than any climate model predicted. Last summer, temperatures in the Yukon reached 30 degrees Celsius. Unheard of. The permafrost is thawing to record depths, and Oatman's Drift isn't the only place where gold rush miners disturbed ancient ground. There are abandoned mining operations throughout the territories, throughout Alaska and Siberia, places where the earth was torn open and is now melting. How many sealed pockets are there? How many organisms are waking up as their prisons turn from solid to liquid? The scientific community talks about permafrost melt releasing methane and ancient bacteria. They have no idea what else might be down there. What intelligence might have been frozen since before humans walked upright. I hear them singing now. Not just the 7 from Oatman's Drift. More of them. A chorus growing larger every night as the planet warms and the ancient ice releases its prisoners. They're learning to coordinate, to communicate across vast distances. They're patient. They've waited millions of years. They can wait a few more decades while we do their work for them, melting the seals, turning their solid prison into liquid freedom. So when you hear about record permafrost thaw, about ancient organisms being released from the ice, about mysterious illnesses in Arctic communities, remember this story. Remember that some things were frozen for a reason. And remember that the bodies standing in the ice aren't just corpses. They're watching. They're waiting. And with every degree the planet warms, they get closer to the thaw they've been humming about since before we learned to make fire. The radio in my truck picked up a station that doesn't exist. And now I'm not sure I exist either. Let me explain before this gets worse. Before the horizon finishes bending and I disappear completely. My name is Dave Hutchinson, and I've been running long-haul routes across the Trans-Canada for 22 years. I know every truck stop between Vancouver and Halifax. Every speed trap. Every place where you can still get decent coffee at 3 a.m. I'm telling you this so you understand. I'm not some rookie who panics at shadows. I know these roads. Or I thought I did. It was November pushing midnight, and I was crossing Saskatchewan on Highway 1. If you've never driven the prairies at night, you can't understand the emptiness. It's not like mountain darkness or forest darkness. It's absolute. The sky and the ground merge into one endless black, and your headlights just die in it, swallowed up like they never existed. The only proof you're moving is the white line rushing under your wheels and the kilometer markers flashing past. I'd been on the road for 16 hours, hauling auto parts from Calgary to Winnipeg, running on bad coffee and worse music. My usual stations had faded to static hours ago, so I was scanning, looking for anything to keep me awake. That's when I found 99.9 FM. The signal came in crystal clear, no static at all despite being in the middle of nowhere. A calm voice, male, with an accent I couldn't quite place, and he was describing my truck. The Freightliner Cascadia, he said pleasantly, approaching kilometer marker 382. Fuel at 3/4. Speed holding steady at 108, driver showing signs of fatigue. I almost drove off the road. I checked my speedometer. 108 exactly. I looked at my fuel gauge. 3/4. Kilometer marker 382 flashed past in my headlights. The voice continued. David Hutchinson, age 47, Calgary to Winnipeg run. Thinking about his daughter. Always thinking about his daughter on this stretch. My hands went numb on the wheel. Nobody calls me David except my ex-wife, and she hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. Not since Emma died. Not since our daughter stepped off a curb in Vancouver and never made it to the other side. I grabbed the radio dial to change the station, but the voice said, "Please don't touch the dial, Dave. You're approaching a roadside offering point. You'll want to hear the instructions." Every instinct told me to turn it off, to pull over, to do anything but keep listening. But the voice had that quality, not threatening, just absolutely certain, like a doctor explaining a diagnosis. You listen because some part of you knows they're telling the truth, even if you don't want to hear it. In 2.3 kilometers, you'll see a hitchhiker on the right shoulder. She'll be wearing a red jacket. You'll recognize her. This is your roadside offering, Dave. To keep the road straight, you must leave a piece of the journey behind. The highway ahead was empty. No cars, no lights, nothing but that infinite black and the white line. Then my headlights caught something on the shoulder. A figure in red. I eased off the gas, my heart hammering. As I got closer, the figure turned and I saw Emma's face. My daughter. Dead 3 years. Standing on the side of Highway 1 in Saskatchewan, thumb out, smiling that crooked smile she'd had since she was 6. I slammed the brakes. The truck shuddered to a stop, air brakes hissing, and I sat there, gripping the wheel while my mind tried to break itself into pieces that made sense. It wasn't her. Couldn't be her. Emma was buried in a cemetery in Burnaby. I'd carried her coffin. I'd watched them lower it into the ground. But the figure was walking toward my truck now, and every detail was right. The way she walked, slightly pigeon-toed. The red jacket I'd bought her for her 16th birthday. The shape of her face. Her mother's cheekbones and my stubborn jaw. The radio voice spoke again. Every 100 kilometers on this stretch, there's a stone cairn. Local drivers stop to leave a memory, a photo, a piece of jewelry, something that anchors them to the past. If you don't leave an offering, Dave, the road begins to loop. You'll drive forever through the same stretch of highway, watching your fuel gauge drop, watching the horizon, never reaching the other side. Emma reached my passenger door. She knocked on the window, her knuckles making that familiar tap-tap-tap pattern she used to use on my bedroom door when she was little. "Dad?" Her voice was muffled through the glass but unmistakable. "Dad, can you let me in? It's cold out here." I reached for the door handle. Then I saw her eyes. They were Emma's eyes, that same green-brown hazel. But they weren't focused on me. They were focused on something behind me. And they were terrified. I turned. Through my driver's side window, I could see the horizon. Except it wasn't flat anymore. The line where earth met sky was curving upward, bending like the inside of a bowl, like the world was folding in on itself. I hit the gas. The truck lurched forward, engine roaring, and Emma, or whatever was wearing Emma's face, ran alongside for a moment before falling behind. In my side mirror, I watched her standing in the road, getting smaller, her hand still raised in that familiar wave she used to give me when I dropped her off at school. The radio crackled. "Poor choice, Dave. But it's your journey. Let's see how far you get." The highway stretched ahead straight as a ruler, but something was wrong with the geometry. I was driving forward, the kilometer markers were counting up, 385, 386, 387, but the horizon was rising. The flat prairie was curving upward on both sides of me, like I was driving into a massive cylinder. My trucker's brain tried to rationalize it. Optical illusion, fatigue hallucination, bad coffee. But I've been tired before. I've driven through every kind of weather and exhaustion. I know the difference between seeing things and seeing things. This was real. The sky was disappearing. That infinite prairie sky that goes on forever was being swallowed by Earth curving upward. I could see stars below me now, or things that looked like stars. The white line kept unspooling under my wheels, but I was starting to understand that I wasn't moving forward. I was moving inward. At kilometer marker 400, I saw the cairn. Just a small pile of stones on the shoulder, maybe 3 feet high, with objects scattered around its base. I caught glimpses as my headlights swept past. Photographs curling in plastic sleeves, a child's toy, a wedding ring on a chain, a lock of white hair tied with ribbon. The offerings, the pieces of journey left behind. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, I'd have to admit this was real. That I was having a conversation with something through my radio about leaving memories on the side of the road. I'd have to accept that my daughter's ghost, or something wearing her shape, was part of some ritual I didn't understand. So I drove. And the world kept curving. The radio voice had gone quiet, but I could hear something underneath the silence, a rhythmic thumping, deep and resonant, like a massive drum being struck at regular intervals. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the truck's frame, through my seat, through my chest. At kilometer marker 450, I realized what I was hearing. It was the sound of the road itself. Of the prairie. The flatlands of Saskatchewan aren't flat at all. They're the skin of an enormous drum, stretched tight across the frame of the earth. And something beneath was playing it. The indigenous peoples knew. That's why the cairns are there, why the offerings are required. This isn't a highway built on land. It's a highway built on something alive. Something vast and ancient that tolerates our presence only if we pay the toll. To keep the road straight, you must leave a piece of the journey behind. Not a memory, a piece of yourself. A sacrifice to keep the drum skin from swallowing you whole. I looked at my fuel gauge. Quarter tank. I'd used half my fuel driving 100 kilometers. The math didn't work. Unless I'd been driving in circles, caught in a loop, burning diesel while the road led me nowhere at all. In my rearview mirror, I saw lights. Another vehicle, gaining fast. But when it got close enough, I saw it was my own truck. Same company logo. Same scratched paint on the driver's side. Same me behind the wheel, staring ahead with exhausted eyes, not seeing the version of me watching in the mirror. I was looking at myself from the last loop. Or the next one. Time was folding like the horizon, and I was trapped in the crease. The radio crackled back to life. "You're running low, Dave. Fuel and options both. Last cairn coming up in 5 kilometers. This is your final offering point. After this, there's only the center." "What's at the center?" I asked out loud, not expecting an answer. "You are," the voice said simply. The cairn appeared in my headlights, larger than the others. A proper structure of stones with hundreds of offerings piled around it. But what made my breath stop was the hitchhiker standing beside it. Emma again. But this time she was holding something. A backpack. And pinned to that backpack was a missing person poster. I slowed down. I couldn't help it, and as I crawled past, my headlights illuminated the poster clearly. It was my face. My name: David Hutchinson. Missing since November 2021. Last seen on Highway 1 in Saskatchewan. 3 years ago. The same November Emma died. The same night I got the call from my ex-wife. The same night I drove across the country in grief and rage. Refusing to stop. Refusing to sleep. Refusing to accept that my daughter was gone. I never made it across Saskatchewan. I've been looping the same stretch of highway for 3 years. Burning phantom diesel, watching the horizon curve. Seeing my daughter on the shoulder over and over. The voice on the radio wasn't describing my journey. It was my journey. The static I was hearing was the sound of my own thoughts. Looping and degrading. Caught in the drum skin of the prairie. Playing the same beat over and over. My truck is stopped now. The engine finally gave out at what the odometer claims is kilometer marker 500. Though I know I haven't moved at all. I'm sitting here watching the horizon complete its curve overhead. Watching the stars rearrange themselves into patterns that look almost like roads. Like white lines stretching across the black. Emma is walking toward me again. She's been walking toward me for 3 years, and I've been running for just as long. This time I think I'll let her reach the truck. Maybe that's what the offering is. Not a photograph or a piece of jewelry, but the journey itself. The refusal to accept what can't be changed. The loop of grief that keeps you driving through the same stretch of road, convinced that if you just keep moving, you won't have to arrive at the truth. So here's what I need you to understand. If you're ever driving across Saskatchewan at night and you pick up a station at 99.9 FM, change it immediately. If you see cairns on the shoulder with offerings around them, stop and leave something. Leave a memory. Leave a regret. Leave whatever piece of yourself is keeping you in the loop. And if you see a hitchhiker who looks like someone you've lost, someone you'd do anything to see again, don't stop. Keep driving. Because the prairie isn't flat. It's the skin of something much older than the roads we've built across it. And it's always listening. Always drumming, always waiting for travelers who refuse to leave their grief behind. I can hear Emma's footsteps now. I can hear the drumbeat getting louder, and I can finally see what's been following me all along. My own reflection in the rearview mirror, driving toward myself, caught in a loop that will never end until I finally stop running. The road doesn't go anywhere, friend. It only ever leads you to where you already are.